For all of the media complaining about Donald Trump provoking constitutional crises, Joe Biden is provoking a pretty serious constitutional crisis in Texas by failing to secure the border in Texas. I want to play for you what I find very notable, and that is Joe Biden's view on sanctuary cities when he was running for president of the United States in 2007. Joe Biden was in a debate. He was on stage with the others, Bill Richardson, Chris Dodd, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, all the people running for president. He was asked about sanctuary cities in 2007. Listen to this.
Would you allow these cities to ignore the federal law regarding the reporting of illegal immigrants and, in fact, provide sanctuary to these immigrants?
The reason the cities ignore the federal law is the fact that there is no funding at the federal level to provide for the kind of enforcement at the federal level you need. Pick up the New York Times today. There's a city not far across the river from my state that imposed similar sanctions. And what they found out is, as a consequence of that, their city went in the dumps, in the dumpster. Stores started closing. Everything started to happen. And they changed the policy. Part of the problem is you have to have a federal government that can enforce laws. This administration has been fundamentally derelict in not funding any of the requirements that are needed even to enforce the existing law.
So, Senator Biden, yes or no, would you allow the cities to ignore the federal law?
No.
No. He wouldn't allow them to ignore federal law. By the way, this was before the facelift, the Botox, and the dementia. Notice the change in Joe Biden from then to now. Not stammering, not stuttering. I thought he had a speech impediment. He didn't there. He wasn't going, it was a pretty clear, precise answer from Joe Biden. Joe Biden today is provoking a constitutional crisis in Texas. But to get there, I need to explain to you exactly what happened at the Supreme Court this past week. I was talking to y'all about this and the issue at the court where they agreed with the Biden administration. What was at stake there was whether or not the federal government had waived sovereign immunity. And sovereign immunity means that the federal government cannot be sued. This is the case, and the issue before the Supreme Court is the federal government able to be sued by the states over the immigration issue? Have they waived sovereign immunity? And the particular issue there with the Supreme Court was an injunction placed against federal government officers that they could not remove border razor wire fencing, even though it was impeding their job. And that was all that was at stake at the Supreme Court. The case continues. And what the Supreme Court said, and this isn't a novel issue, this is an issue that the courts have addressed in the past. The courts have said that the federal government injunction should be vacated so that the federal government is allowed to remove the razor wire if it impedes their job. There are progressives like, for example, Beto O'Rourke, who is arguing that Texas is defying the United States Supreme Court. Texas is not defying the United States Supreme Court by continuing to lay border wire. The Supreme Court specifically removed an injunction against the federal government's ability to remove razor wire. It had nothing to do with Texas at all. There was nothing to do with Texas. Texas is not enjoined. Texas is not compelled. There is no spirit of the Supreme Court decision. There is the Supreme Court decision, which was the removal of an injunction against the federal government. If removing the border wire impedes its functions, it is allowed to. Anyone telling you anything differently is actually being dishonest. Now, Greg Abbott, for his part, the governor of the state of Texas, has publicly released a letter saying that this is an Article 1, Section 10 matter. Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3 of the United States Constitution says, "No state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any duty of tonnage, keep troops or ships of war in the time of peace, enter into any agreement or compact with another state or with the foreign power, or engage in war unless actually invaded or in such imminent danger as will not admit delay." Greg Abbott, in his public statements, is saying that Texas is being invaded. The federal government has not stopped the invasion. Therefore, Texas has a right of self-defense. Now, you should note Greg Abbott publicly in letters is making Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3 an argument. In public, in court, Texas has not made this argument. Now, the ball game has shifted a bit beyond Article 1, Section 10, and we're actually going to the very basics of the Constitution here in this crisis, and it is a constitutional crisis Joe Biden is engaged in. Listen, if you can define what happened on January 6th as an insurrection, there's no way to conclude anything other than this mass wave of humanity crossing the Texas border is an invasion. If January 6th is an insurrection, this is an invasion. If you're going to play the word game with a 4-hour temper tantrum in the halls of Congress, you got a better, clearer, precise definition of invasion for this. There's something called the Peace of Westphalia. The Peace of Westphalia was a settled treaty after the Great Wars of Europe, and it established nationhood. It established boundaries. Nations became really sovereign states outside of Roman imperial and Holy Roman imperial territory and papal control. You had real nation states and real people. And since that time, by and large, we have viewed crossing the lines of nation states with arms to be an invasion. Prior to that time, a mass wave of people coming across a nation state's border with or without arms was an invasion. And in many parts of the world today, it's still considered an invasion. When a mass wave of humanity, foreign humanity, crosses a border, it's considered an invasion, whether or not they're there to take over or not. And Texas says, based on these historic definitions, we're being invaded. Now, there's a wrinkle in this as well. There are 15 sovereign nations that came into the United States of America, as I mentioned the other day, ceding limited power. You have in the Declaration of Independence, you've got Connecticut, Delaware. Well, let me just go in the order of sign. Georgia, Maryland, Delaware, Massachusetts, North Carolina, Virginia, New York, Rhode Island, South Carolina, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire. You've got 12 or 13 sovereign nations that signed the Declaration of Independence. When they then decided to form the Congress and the Constitution, they ceded limited authority to Washington, D.C. 2 other sovereign nations joined the United States. One is the nation of Hawaii, that Kingdom of Hawaii that became part of the Republic, and the other is the Republic of Texas. It is really hard to imagine the Republic of Texas would have joined the American Republic if it knew that a president of the United States would not defend Texas's border from Mexico. Given the history between Texas and Mexico, you cannot possibly conceive of a time Texas would have willingly, by treaty, joined the American Republic, knowing that the United States would not protect its border. It's also hard to imagine any of the original colonies joining the American Union and giving up their right of self-defense. I mean, have you looked at the map? Georgia was bordered in the south by Spanish territory. It had British and French territory around it as well. Remember, Georgia stretched from the Mississippi. Alabama and Mississippi were part of the state of Georgia. You're really going to tell the nation of Georgia, once it got its independence from Great Britain, that the United States wouldn't protect its borders from Spain, France, and Great Britain, or Massachusetts, or New York? I mean, New York, Massachusetts, those New England states, deeply worried about British territory in Canada. You really believe they would join the Union of the United States and say, well, if we're okay if the United States doesn't defend our border and we're giving up our right of self-defense? Really? Do you think that's actually something that would have happened? That's Texas's argument. There's no way this union of states would exist if the states knew going in that they gave up their right to defend themselves and the federal government wouldn't defend them. There's no way that could exist. That's Texas's argument. And it's a legitimate, valid argument. This is Joe Biden provoking a constitutional crisis. All Joe Biden has to do is secure the border. You know, one of the remarkable things here is how in Virginia, Fairfax County, Virginia, there is a rapist, pedophile, illegal immigrant who the county of Fairfax County, Virginia, has allowed out of prison so that he doesn't have to be turned over to ICE. These woke progressives in counties like that are more concerned about the illegal aliens than they are the American states. And by the way, no state was really concerned with Texas until they started feeling the effects. Chicago, New York, and the like, these cities and the states they're tied to, New York State and Illinois, California, and the like, they couldn't care less when Texas was burdened with this stuff. And for some reason, they care deeply that Texas is trying to defend its border. This is provoking a constitutional crisis to the foundational underpinnings of the United States of America. Can a semi-sovereign entity that has a right of self-defense in the Constitution actually defend itself from an invasion? No, it's not a military invasion, but they are bringing over human traffickers. They're bringing over drugs. They're bringing over crime. They're bringing over disease. They are bringing over disease, actually. Apparently, you're a racist when you point that fact out, but it's true. Can Texas defend itself or not? That's what this is about. It is the biggest story right now. The Texas governor has called out the Texas National Guard to go secure the border and repel the invaders. Progressives are asking Joe Biden to federalize the Texas National Guard to stop Texas from what it is doing. Joe Biden will be exacerbating a constitutional crisis he and progressives provoked if he does that. The Republic of Texas, by treaty, joined into these United States of America. If Texas is not allowed to defend its border from an invasion from Mexico, its historic enemy, and also partner and cousin, if Texas is not allowed to protect itself from invasion, then the promises made to Texas to get it to join our union are a fiction. Joe Biden is playing with fire if he doesn't allow Texas to protect itself. And the Joe Biden of 2007 was willing to allow states to protect themselves and willing to enforce federal immigration law against cities that decided to declare themselves sanctuary cities. The Joe Biden of today is not in charge. The progressives rule the roost. And progressives are totally willing to provoke constitutional crises and even break apart this nation that they already find illegitimate. The question is, will Joe Biden let them?
Want to be on